You abandoned this family. My brother's voice slammed through the courtroom so hard that even the court reporter stopped typing for a second. You disappeared for years while Mom and Dad suffered, Jason shouted, pointing directly at me. And now you want half of everything Dad worked for? The judge didn't answer right away. Instead, he opened a thick folder from the estate records and slowly adjusted his glasses. Then he looked at Jason and asked one quiet question. Mr. Carter, who exactly sent your mother $12,000 every month for the last 8 years? The room went completely silent. Jason's face lost color, and for the first time in my life, my older brother looked afraid. 3 weeks earlier, I stood outside my parents' church in Pensacola, Florida, staring at the white funeral program in my hands, while the Gulf wind pushed against my black dress. Harold Carter, beloved husband, father, and grandfather. My father had been dead for 4 days, and I still hadn't cried. Maybe because grief doesn't always arrive as tears. Sometimes it arrives as numbness. Sometimes it settles into your chest like wet concrete. The church parking lot overflowed with pickup trucks and old sedans from people who'd known my father for decades. He'd spent 42 years working at the naval shipyard before retiring with bad knees and a failing heart. Everybody respected Harold Carter. Quiet men usually earn that kind of respect slowly. I spotted my brother near the church entrance, shaking hands like a politician at a county fair. Jason wore a navy suit that probably cost more than 3 months of my grocery budget. His arm rested around our mother while he accepted sympathy from neighbors. He looked exhausted, but not grieving. There's a difference. When his eyes finally landed on me, his jaw tightened immediately. Mom turned too. The coldness in her expression hit harder than I expected. No smile. No hug. No, I'm glad you made it home safely. Just silence. I should have been used to it by then. I'd spent most of my adult life learning how to stand in rooms where I wasn't fully wanted. I walked toward them slowly. Hi, Mom. She gave a small nod without meeting my eyes. Jason let out a dry laugh. Well, he said loudly, look who finally remembered she had a family. A few nearby relatives awkwardly looked away. I ignored him. I'm here for Dad, I said quietly. Jason smirked. Funny timing. Mom finally spoke. That's enough, Jason. But she didn't sound angry at him. She sounded tired. That hurt worse. Inside the church, I sat alone near the back pew, while old family friends shared stories about my father fixing fishing boats, helping neighbors after hurricanes, and volunteering at veteran breakfasts every Memorial Day. I listened quietly. Every story sounded true, but incomplete. Nobody talked about the man who quietly called me every Sunday night for 15 years. Nobody talked about the whispered conversations from overseas military bases while mortars echoed in the distance. Nobody talked about the nights Dad cried because he couldn't pay Mom's medical bills. Those stories belonged to me, and apparently they were going to stay buried with him. After the service, people gathered in the fellowship hall for sandwiches and coffee casseroles the church ladies always made after funerals. I stood near a window holding untouched coffee when my niece Ava approached me carefully. She was 20 now, college sophomore, sweet kid. Hi, Aunt Emily, she said softly. I smiled for the first time all day. You've grown up on me. She laughed a little. You always say that. That's because it keeps happening. For a second, things felt normal again. Then Jason appeared beside us. Ava, your grandmother's looking for you. She hesitated before walking away. The second she disappeared, Jason's face hardened. You've got some nerve showing up after all these years. I kept my voice calm. I came to bury my father. No, he snapped. You came for the money. The accusation didn't surprise me. Still, hearing it out loud stung more than I expected. I didn't ask Dad for anything. Jason stepped closer. You left this family behind while I stayed here cleaning up every mess. I almost laughed at the irony. But I stayed quiet. That always frustrated him more. He lowered his voice. Mom's not gonna lose this house because of you. I stared at him carefully then. Lose the house. Dad had owned the house outright for years. Or at least, he was supposed to. Something cold moved through my stomach. What are you talking about? Jason looked away too fast. Nothing. Then he walked off. That night I stayed in an old motel near Highway 98 because Mom never invited me home. The room smelled faintly like mildew and cigarette smoke baked into the curtains from 20 years earlier. I sat on the edge of the bed staring at the blinking air conditioner while memories crawled through my head. Afghanistan. Kuwait. North Carolina? Long nights moving military cargo. Birthdays missed. Christmas calls from overseas. Wiring money home month after month. I closed my eyes. Dad's final voicemail still sat saved in my phone. I listened to it again around midnight. "Hey, Emmy, just checking in. Your mom's treatments went okay this week. Don't worry about us. I know you're tired. I'm proud of you anyway." His breathing sounded weak near the end. "I wish your brother understood someday." The message ended there. I didn't sleep much after that. 2 days later, the lawyer called us in for the will reading. The office sat in a brick building downtown beside a bait shop and an insurance agency. Small town Florida. The kind of place where everybody knows everybody's business. Jason arrived first with Mom and a leather folder tucked under his arm like he was already preparing for war. When the attorney explained that Dad's estate would be divided equally between both children, Jason exploded instantly. "What?" The lawyer calmly repeated himself. "Mr. Carter's will states that all remaining assets are to be divided 50-50 between Emily Carter and Jason Carter." Jason stood up so fast his chair nearly tipped backward. "This is insane." Mom looked shocked too. Jason pointed directly at me. "She abandoned this family for 20 years. The lawyer tried calming him down, but Jason kept going. "I stayed here, I took care of them, I handled everything while she played soldier overseas." I felt every eye in the room turn toward me. Still, I said nothing. Then Jason delivered the line that changed everything. "If she wants money so badly," he said bitterly, "we'll settle this in court." And deep down, I think that's exactly what my father knew would happen. I drove past my childhood home 3 times before finally pulling into the driveway. The little blue house looked smaller than I remembered. The porch railing leaned slightly now, and one of the shutters hung crooked beside the front window. Dad used to repaint every spring whether it needed it or not. The old oak tree was still there, though. Dad planted it the year I was born. I sat in my rental car for a full minute staring at the house while memories kept arriving uninvited. Summer thunderstorms. Mom frying catfish in the kitchen. Jason teaching me how to ride a bike before he became someone I barely recognized. Funny how grief mixes good memories with painful ones until you can't separate them anymore. I finally stepped out and walked toward the mailbox. The metal flag hung loose and rusted. Bills stuffed the box so tightly I could barely pull them free. Final notices, past due statements, medical collections, property tax warnings. My chest tightened immediately. Dad had never allowed unpaid bills to pile up like this. Never. I stood there flipping through envelopes while the Florida heat pressed down around me like wet wool. Then the front door opened. Mom stepped onto the porch slowly. For a second, she just stared at me. She looked older than she had at the funeral only 2 days earlier. Smaller somehow? Grief ages people fast. "You don't have to stand in the driveway," she said quietly. Not warm, not cold either. Just tired. I walked toward the porch. "How are you feeling?" "I buried my husband," she answered. "How do you think I'm feeling?" I nodded slowly. Fair enough. Inside the house smelled exactly the same. Coffee. Furniture polish. Dad's old pipe tobacco lingering in the walls even though Mom made him quit years ago. Some things never really leave a home. Mom moved carefully into the kitchen while I noticed stacks of unopened paperwork covering the dining table. More bills. More bank notices. I picked one up. Second mortgage statement. My stomach dropped. Dad took out a second mortgage. Why? The balance still owed was nearly $90,000. Mom noticed my expression immediately. "Your father said not to worry about it." "When did this happen?" She sat down heavily. "A few years ago." "A few years ago for what?" She looked away. "Jason had some business problems." "Of course he did." I closed my eyes for a second. Dad had mortgaged the house to save Jason again. How bad were the debts? Mom rubbed her forehead. "I don't know all the details." That meant she knew enough. I'd seen this pattern my entire life. Jason messed up. Dad rescued him. Mom defended him. And somehow everybody acted like it was normal. Meanwhile, I'd spent 20 years trying not to become another burden. Mom suddenly looked at me carefully. "Your brother stayed." I almost laughed. There it was. The family religion. Jason stayed. As if physical proximity automatically made someone loyal. "He lived 10 minutes away," I said quietly. Dad still climbed ladders fixing roofs in his 70s. "That's not fair." "No," I answered softly. "It isn't." The room went still after that. I didn't come home looking for a fight. But grief has a way of loosening old truths people spent years avoiding. Mom stood and opened the refrigerator. "You still take your coffee black?" "Yeah." She poured 2 cups automatically. For a few seconds it almost felt like old times again. Then she said the one thing I knew had lived in her heart for years. "You could have come home more." There it was. The accusation beneath every conversation since I enlisted. I wrapped both hands around the coffee mug before answering. The Marines sent me where they needed me. You always chose them. No, I said gently, I chose survival. Mom frowned. I rarely talked about our childhood openly. Dad worked constantly, but money was always thin. Jason burned through what little we had. And after he started gambling in his 20s, things got worse. There were months when Mom skipped medications to keep lights on. Months Dad secretly borrowed money from coworkers. I remembered the night I enlisted clearer than almost any memory in my life. Dad sat beside me on the back porch while cicadas screamed in the dark summer trees. You sure about this, Emmy? No, I admitted, but I can't stay here. Dad nodded slowly. I know. What if Mom hates me for leaving? He looked toward the kitchen window where Mom and Jason laughed over television reruns inside. Your mother loves hard, he said quietly. But sometimes she confuses love with holding on. I never forgot that sentence. Basic training changed me fast. The Marines have a way of stripping weakness out of you whether you're ready or not. I learned discipline, silence, distance. And I learned how to keep functioning while lonely. Especially lonely. The first time Dad asked for money, he sounded embarrassed. Only temporary, he promised over the phone. Jason had wrecked his truck drunk and lost another job. I wired $3,000 the next morning. Then came Mom's medications, then roof repairs after a hurricane, then overdue property taxes, then Jason's bankruptcy, then hospital bills after Dad's heart surgery. Eventually, the money transfers became routine, every month, without fail. Even after leaving active duty and moving into military logistics contracting, I kept sending money home. $12,000 monthly during the final years. Most of my salary disappeared before I ever touched it. But I kept living simply anyway. Small apartment. Used truck. No vacations. No husband. No children. Just work. And family obligations nobody acknowledged. Mom interrupted my thoughts suddenly. Jason says you're fighting him over the inheritance. I stared at her. I'm not fighting anyone. He says you want to force us to sell the house. The realization hit me immediately. Jason was poisoning her against me already. I would never throw you out of this house. Mom looked uncertain. That hurt more than anger would have. She truly didn't know what to believe anymore. A truck engine rumbled outside suddenly. Jason. Of course. He stormed into the kitchen carrying grocery bags dramatically like a man auditioning for sainthood. The second he saw me, his expression darkened. What are you doing here? Talking to Mom. Jason dumped groceries onto the counter. Well, Mom needs rest, not stress. I stood slowly. You mean she needs protection from the truth? His eyes narrowed instantly. What's that supposed to mean? I held up the mortgage statement. How much debt did you put Dad in? Mom immediately looked nervous. Jason stepped forward defensively. You don't know what you're talking about. Then explain $90,000. His face flushed red. That was Dad's decision. No, I said quietly, it was his sacrifice. Jason slammed his hand against the counter. You think sending checks makes you family? The words echoed through the kitchen. Mom looked stunned. And in that moment, I realized something terrible. Jason knew. Maybe not every detail, but he knew money had been coming from somewhere all these years, and he'd convinced himself he deserved it. That night after I left the house, I sat in my car outside the marina watching fishing boats rock against dark water. Dad used to bring me there after school sometimes, said the ocean made problems feel smaller. My phone buzzed around 9 o'clock. Unknown number. I answered carefully. Miss Carter? Yes. This is Daniel Reeves from the probate office. We may need additional financial records before next week's hearing. What kind of records? A pause. Your father attached several private account statements to the estate file. My grip tightened on the phone. What statements? Another pause. The judge specifically requested them remain sealed until court. The courthouse in Escambia County smelled like old paper floor polish and bad coffee. Somehow courthouses always smell the same no matter where you go. I arrived 20 minutes early wearing the only navy blazer I owned that still fit properly. My hands stayed steady, but my stomach hadn't settled since sunrise. I'd spent years working around military command centers, emergency logistics operations, and deployment briefings. None of that prepared me for sitting in a courtroom while your own family argued about your worth. Jason stood near the courtroom doors with his attorney when I walked in. He stopped talking immediately. His lawyer, a silver-haired man named Richard Coleman, looked polished and expensive. The kind of attorney who knew how to make ordinary people feel small without ever raising his voice. Jason folded his arms. You actually came. I looked at him evenly. You filed the case. His jaw tightened. You could still walk away from this peacefully. I almost smiled. Peacefully. Interesting word coming from him. Before I could answer, Mom entered slowly behind Jason. She looked nervous, more fragile than angry now. Her eyes met mine briefly, then dropped toward the floor. That hurt more than Jason's accusations ever could. The bailiff opened the courtroom doors a few minutes later. Carter estate hearing. We entered quietly. Judge Walter Bennett already sat at the bench reviewing paperwork through reading glasses low on his nose. He looked about 70 himself. Calm face. Former military, if I had to guess from the posture alone. The courtroom wasn't crowded, but several relatives had shown up anyway. Small-town family drama attracts spectators like church gossip. I recognized 2 cousins and aunt from Mobile and 3 neighbors from my parents' street sitting quietly in the back rows. Jason wanted an audience. Of course he did. The hearing began formally enough. Estate summaries. Property values. Outstanding debts. Then Richard Coleman stood. Your Honor. He began smoothly. My client believes the existing will fails to reflect the reality of who actually cared for Harold and Diane Carter during their later years. I sat quietly. Coleman continued. Mr. Jason Carter remained physically present for both parents, while Miss Emily Carter voluntarily removed herself from the family for nearly 2 decades. There it was. Physically present. As if sitting nearby automatically counted as sacrifice, the attorney walked slowly before the judge. Mr. Carter handled medical appointments, household responsibilities, transportation needs, and emotional support, while his sister pursued a military career and later private contracting opportunities overseas. Jason lowered his head slightly at exactly the right moments. Performance, every bit of it. Then the attorney delivered the line designed to destroy me. Quite frankly, Your Honor, my client believes Miss Carter abandoned her responsibilities as a daughter. The word hung there. Abandoned. Like I'd deserted wounded people on a battlefield. Judge Bennett glanced toward me calmly. Miss Carter, would you like to respond? Every eye in the room shifted toward me. I could have explained everything right then. The deployments, the bills, the transfers, the years Dad quietly called asking for help. But something stopped me. Maybe exhaustion, maybe pride, or maybe I was simply too tired to beg people to see love that should have been obvious already. So I answered honestly. I served where I was assigned, Your Honor. Jason let out a bitter laugh. There she goes again, always talking like a soldier instead of a daughter. The judge frowned slightly. Mr. Carter, control yourself. Jason shook his head emotionally. No, Your Honor, somebody finally needs to say it. He turned toward the courtroom dramatically. My father died believing this family was broken because my sister chose strangers over us. Mom flinched beside him. That caught my attention. Jason noticed too late. Because suddenly I realized something important. Dad never would have said that. Not in a million years. Jason was rewriting our father now that the man couldn't defend himself. The attorney placed a hand lightly on Jason's arm. Take your time. Jason nodded like a grieving saint. I gave up opportunities to stay close to my parents, he continued. I sacrificed my own future to care for them. I stared at him in disbelief. Sacrificed. Jason had spent half his adult life unemployed. Dad paid his truck payments. Dad covered gambling debts. Dad refinanced the house twice because of him. And somehow Jason still saw himself as the martyr. The judge reviewed paperwork silently for several moments. Then he looked toward Mom. Mrs. Carter, would you like to make a statement? Mom hesitated. Her hands trembled slightly. Jason leaned closer to her immediately. You can tell the truth, Mom. Something about the way he said it bothered me deeply. Like coaching. Mom cleared her throat. Emily always worked hard, she said softly. Jason's expression changed instantly. But, she continued nervously, she wasn't around very much. There it was again. Around. The measurement everyone used against me. As though distance erased sacrifice, the judge nodded politely. Then he turned pages inside the estate file slowly. Very slowly. His expression changed almost immediately. He adjusted his glasses. Looked again. Then flipped backward several pages. The room grew quieter. Even Jason noticed something shifting. Judge Bennett leaned back slightly. Counselor, he said carefully, why are these financial records attached to the estate documents? Richard Coleman frowned. I'm sorry. The judge lifted several papers. These monthly wire transfers. My heartbeat slowed instantly. Dad had included them. Jason looked confused. What transfers? Judge Bennett studied the pages carefully. For approximately 8 years, he said slowly, Mrs. Diane Carter received monthly deposits averaging $12,000. The courtroom went still. Mom blinked in confusion. What? The judge continued reading. Consistent deposits, no interruptions. Jason frowned harder. That doesn't make sense. Judge Bennett looked directly at him then. Mr. Carter, do you know who sent your mother this money? Silence. Real silence, not courtroom silence. The kind that changes the oxygen in a room. Jason stared blankly. Mom looked frightened now. The judge turned another page. These funds appear connected to overseas military contracting accounts. My chest tightened. Dad really had prepared for this. Every transfer. Every statement. Every year. Saved. Protected. Jason slowly turned toward me. His face lost color one piece at a time. No, he whispered. I looked down at my hands. The judge spoke again. Miss Carter. I finally raised my eyes. Yes, Your Honor. Did these transfers come from you? Nobody moved. Nobody breathed. I could hear the air conditioner humming above the courtroom ceiling. And suddenly, I was back in tiny overseas apartments eating microwave dinners alone while wiring money home before paying my own bills. Back in Kuwait working 18-hour days. Back in Afghanistan sleeping beside satellite phones waiting for Dad's late-night calls. Back in all those years nobody saw. I answered quietly. Yes, sir. Gasps spread softly through the courtroom. Mom's hand flew to her mouth. Jason stared at me like he'd never seen me before. The judge removed his glasses carefully. Then he asked the question that shattered my brother completely. If Miss Carter abandoned this family, he said slowly, who exactly has been keeping it alive? Nobody spoke for several seconds after the judge asked that question. Jason looked like a man trying to wake himself from a bad dream. Mom sat frozen beside him, both hands covering her mouth, while tears slowly gathered in her eyes. And me, I wished I were anywhere else. That's the part people never understand about family secrets. When the truth finally comes out, it rarely feels victorious. Mostly it feels sad. Judge Bennett laid the papers down carefully. Miss Carter, he said gently, please explain these transfers. I swallowed once before answering. There's not much to explain, Your Honor. The judge raised an eyebrow slightly. $12,000 monthly for nearly 8 years seems like quite a bit to explain. A few nervous chuckles moved through the courtroom before dying quickly. I kept my voice steady. My father called me after my mother got sick. They were behind on medical bills. Mom slowly turned toward me. Sick, she whispered. I looked at her carefully. You had cancer, Mom. Her face crumpled slightly. The judge glanced through more records. These transfers continued long after the treatments. Yes, sir. Why? I hesitated. Because the real answer sounded cruel out loud. Because one person in that family created emergencies faster than I could solve them. Finally, I answered honestly. Because the bills never stopped. Jason suddenly stood up. This is ridiculous. Judge Bennett looked up sharply. Sit down, Mr. Carter. Jason ignored him. She left us for 20 years, and now suddenly she's pretending to be some kind of hero. I closed my eyes briefly. Same Jason. Even cornered by evidence, he still reached for performance. The judge's tone hardened. No one said anything about heroes. Jason pointed at me furiously. She thinks sending money makes her better than everybody else. I looked at him quietly. I never said that. Then why hide it? The question landed harder than he realized. Because deep down, I'd asked myself that same thing for years. Judge Bennett leaned forward slightly. Yes, Miss Carter. Why was this arrangement secret? I looked toward Mom first. Then Jason. Then the old wooden floor between us. Because Dad asked me not to tell anyone. The courtroom stayed silent. The judge frowned thoughtfully. Did he explain why? I nodded slowly. He was ashamed. Jason laughed bitterly. Ashamed of what? This time I looked directly at him. Of how much debt you kept putting them in. The words hit the room like broken glass. Jason's face turned bright red instantly. That's a lie. No, I said quietly, it's not. Judge Bennett lifted another document from the estate file. What exactly were these debts connected to? I answered before Jason could. Failed businesses, credit cards, gambling loans, 2 bankruptcies, back taxes. Mom stared at Jason in disbelief. Jason. He turned toward her immediately. Don't listen to this. The judge interrupted calmly. The court has supporting records for those claims. Jason's breathing became shallow. I could see panic beginning to replace anger now. Because lies work best when nobody brings paperwork. Judge Bennett opened another sealed envelope from the estate file. This appears to be a handwritten statement from Harold Carter himself. The room went completely still again. Dad. Even after death, Dad was still trying to hold the family together. The judge adjusted his glasses and began reading. If you are hearing this, he read slowly, Then my children have probably reached the point I feared most. Mom lowered her head immediately. The judge continued. My daughter Emily has supported this family financially for many years. Most of the money keeping this household alive came from her sacrifices. Jason stared at the table silently. Emily asked for nothing in return, the judge read. No praise, no control, no recognition. I felt heat building behind my eyes for the first time since Dad died. Judge Bennett turned another page. I asked her to keep the arrangement private because I wanted to protect this family from shame, especially Diane. Mom started crying softly. She loved Jason so fiercely that she could never fully see what was happening, and I was too weak to stop it. Jason suddenly slammed his palm against the table. This is unbelievable. The judge looked up sharply. Enough, Mr. Carter. Jason stood anyway. You're all acting like I robbed them. The judge's expression hardened. Didn't you? Jason froze. The silence that followed felt unbearable. Finally, he sat back down slowly. Judge Bennett returned to the letter. There's more. Nobody moved. If Jason ever reads this, the judge continued. I hope he understands something before it's too late. Love is not measured by who stays physically closest. Sometimes the child carrying the heaviest burden is the one suffering quietly far away. Mom broke completely then. The sound that came out of her didn't even sound like crying anymore. It sounded like regret. Deep, crushing regret. I stared at the table because I couldn't bear looking at her. The judge folded the letter carefully. Then he asked softly, Mrs. Carter, were you aware your daughter was paying most household expenses? Mom shook her head slowly through tears. Number. Were you aware Miss Carter funded your cancer treatments? Another shake. No. I closed my eyes briefly. Dad really never told her. Not fully. Maybe he thought protecting everyone would somehow keep the family from falling apart. But hidden truths rot families from the inside eventually. Judge Bennett reviewed more records. There are also tuition payments made to Florida State University under an anonymous trust. Ava, my niece. Jason looked confused again. The judge glanced up. These payments also came from Miss Carter. Mom turned toward me slowly like she no longer recognized her own daughter. You paid for Ava's college. I nodded once. She deserved a chance. Mom covered her face again. Oh my God. Jason looked shattered now. Not remorseful yet. Just exposed. There's a difference. The judge leaned back quietly. Then he looked directly at me. One thing still confuses me, Miss Carter. I waited. You could have defended yourself years ago. Why stay silent? That question settled over the courtroom heavier than all the financial records combined. Even Jason looked at me then, waiting. I thought about every lonely deployment, every missed holiday, every time Mom praised Jason for being there while Dad quietly thanked me over the phone for keeping electricity on. Then I answered honestly, because I didn't want my mother to hate her son. Nobody moved after that, not even Jason. And for the first time since this whole nightmare began, my brother finally looked ashamed. The hearing recessed for lunch, but nobody moved right away. The courtroom sat under a heavy silence that seemed to press against every wall. Jason remained frozen in his chair, staring at the table while Mom quietly cried beside him. I stood slowly gathering my folder and purse, hoping to leave before anybody tried speaking to me. Then I heard Mom's voice behind me. Emily. I stopped. Not because I wanted to. Because after all these years, some part of me still reacted any time my mother sounded broken. I turned carefully. She looked smaller than ever, sitting there alone in the courtroom bench. Her mascara had streaked slightly beneath tired eyes, and grief seemed to pull at her shoulders like physical weight. I didn't know she whispered. The words trembled so badly they almost disappeared. I nodded once. I know. That only made her cry harder. I couldn't stay there watching it. So I left the courtroom and walked outside into the humid Florida afternoon. The heat hit me instantly. Thunderclouds gathered low over Pensacola Bay while traffic rolled slowly past the courthouse square. I sat alone on a bench beneath an old magnolia tree and stared at nothing for a while. Funny thing about emotional exhaustion. Eventually you stop feeling angry. You just feel empty. About 20 minutes later, somebody sat down beside me. Jason. I almost stood immediately. Relax, he muttered. I'm not here to fight. I kept my eyes forward. That'd be a nice change. He gave a bitter half laugh. Neither of us spoke for several seconds. Then he rubbed both hands over his face and said quietly, You really paid for all that. There was no point lying anymore. Yes. Why? I looked at him carefully. What do you mean, why? You hated us. That one genuinely stunned me. I turned fully toward him for the first time all day. Hated you. He shrugged helplessly. You left. There it was again. That childish equation he'd built his whole life around. Leaving equals betrayal. Staying equals love. No matter what actually happened afterward. I leaned back against the bench slowly. You know what I remember most from leaving for basic training? He frowned slightly. What? Dad slipping $50 into my bag because he knew I didn't have enough money for toiletries. Jason looked away. I remember Mom crying like somebody died, I continued. And I remember you asking Dad if you could have my car. His face tightened immediately. That was 20 years ago. Yes, I said softly. And somehow nothing ever changed after that. The breeze picked up around us, carrying the smell of rain and salt water. Jason stared out toward the street. You think I'm some kind of monster? I didn't answer immediately, because the truth was more complicated than that. No, I finally said. I think you got used to being rescued. That hit him harder than yelling would've. He lowered his eyes toward the sidewalk. I didn't ask Dad to mortgage the house. No, I replied quietly. You just kept creating situations where he felt he had to. Jason swallowed hard. For the first time since I came home, he actually looked tired instead of angry. You don't understand what it was like staying here? I almost laughed at the irony again. You're right, I said. I was too busy sleeping in military tents. His jaw clenched. That's not fair. Neither was wiring half my paycheck home while hearing people call me selfish. That one landed. Hard. Jason looked down at his hands. You know what Dad used to say about you? I waited. He said you were the strongest person he'd ever known. Something inside my chest tightened painfully. Dad rarely gave compliments directly. That generation of men didn't always know how. Jason shook his head slowly. I hated hearing it. I looked at him carefully. Why? Because every time he said your name, Jason whispered, I felt like I was already disappointing him. That changed something. Not everything, but something. For the first time, I stopped seeing only the selfish adult sitting beside me. I saw the scared little boy our parents accidentally trapped inside him. Dad expected strength from me. Mom protected weakness in Jason. And over decades, those roles hardened into identities none of us escaped. Jason laughed bitterly to himself. You know the worst part? What? I actually convinced myself you owed us that money. I stared at him. He shook his head in shame. You left, so I figured, I don't know, maybe taking care of Mom and Dad was your responsibility financially. The honesty sounded ugly. But honest ugliness is still better than lies. Rain finally began falling lightly through the magnolia branches overhead. Jason looked exhausted. I really thought you abandoned us. I answered quietly. No, you just needed me invisible. That sentence stayed between us for a long time. Eventually, Jason stood slowly. I don't know how to fix this. I looked toward the courthouse windows. You probably can't. He nodded sadly like he already knew that. Then he walked away through the rain. That evening I returned to the motel expecting another lonely night and bad television. Instead I found Mom sitting outside my room in one of the plastic chairs near the ice machine. Seeing her there nearly stopped my heart. She stood slowly when she saw me. I hope this isn't inappropriate. I unlocked the room quietly. Come inside. The motel air conditioner rattled loudly while Mom sat carefully at the small table by the window. She looked around the room once. You've been staying here this whole time? Yes. Guilt crossed her face immediately. I sat across from her. Neither of us knew how to begin. Finally, Mom reached into her purse and pulled out a bundle of old envelopes tied with string. I found these in your father's dresser. I recognized my handwriting instantly. Letters. Dozens of them. Letters I mailed home from overseas bases over the years. Mom's hands trembled while touching them. I never read most of these, she admitted quietly. Your father said you were busy and didn't want to bother me with military things. I swallowed hard. Dad protected everyone until the very end. Mom opened one carefully. I spent Christmas eating vending machine cookies in Kuwait tonight. She read softly, tears already forming again. But at least the money should arrive before the mortgage payment is due. Her voice cracked completely. She opened another. I know Jason's struggling again. Please don't make him feel ashamed. Just tell Dad I'll send extra next month. Another. I'm sorry I missed your birthday, Mom. I promise I'll make it home next year. She stopped reading then because she couldn't continue. The room filled with quiet crying. Not dramatic. Not loud. Just years of misunderstanding finally collapsing under truth. Mom looked at me through tears. You were lonely all this time? I nodded once. Yes. She covered her mouth and whispered the words I'd waited 20 years to hear. You never abandoned us. The final hearing took place 3 days later under gray skies and steady Florida rain. By then, word had spread through half of Pensacola. Small towns survive on fishing church suppers and other people's family tragedies. When I walked into the courthouse that morning, conversations quietly stopped around me. Not hostile this time. Awkward. Respectful, maybe. I still wasn't sure how to feel about that. Jason stood alone near the courtroom doors when I arrived. No dramatic performance, no loud speeches, no expensive lawyer trying to shape the room. Just my brother looking older than he had a week earlier. He nodded once when he saw me. I nodded back. That was enough. Inside the courtroom, Judge Bennett reviewed the final estate documents while rain tapped softly against the tall windows. Mom sat between us this time instead of beside Jason. A small detail. But emotionally, it meant everything. The judge cleared his throat. After reviewing all financial records, testimony, and supporting documents, this court finds no basis to challenge Harold Carter's original will. Jason lowered his eyes immediately. The estate, the judge continued, will remain divided equally between both children. Nobody reacted. No celebration. No victory. Because by then, this had stopped feeling like a fight over money. Judge Bennett folded his hands together. However, he added carefully, I would like the record to reflect something beyond legal findings. The courtroom quieted further. I have presided over probate and family cases for over 30 years, he said. Most involve anger over property. Very few involve sacrifice of this magnitude. I stared down at the table silently. The judge looked toward Jason. Your sister spent years carrying responsibilities that should never have belonged to one person alone. Jason nodded faintly without arguing. Then the judge looked toward me. And Miss Carter, silence may protect a family temporarily, but hidden sacrifice eventually becomes another form of suffering. That one stayed with me. Because he was right. Keeping quiet hadn't saved us. It only delayed the collapse. The hearing officially ended a few minutes later. People slowly began standing and gathering papers while quiet conversations filled the room. Then something unexpected happened. Jason stood. Not dramatically. Not loudly. He simply faced the courtroom and cleared his throat. I need to say something. The room settled again. Jason looked nervous for the first time in his life. My sister didn't abandon this family, he said quietly. I just spent too many years blaming her because it was easier than blaming myself. Mom immediately started crying again. Jason continued slowly. I kept telling myself staying nearby made me the better son. But the truth is... He swallowed hard. I stayed because everybody kept rescuing me. Nobody moved. I loved my father, he whispered, but I also used him. Those words cost him something. You could hear it. Real accountability always hurts. Jason turned toward me fully then. I don't expect forgiveness, he said, but I am sorry. For a second, 20 years of anger pressed against my chest all at once. Missed birthdays. Overseas holidays. Phone calls asking for more money. Being treated like a stranger in my own family. Part of me wanted to stay angry forever. Honestly, it would have been easier. But Dad didn't spend his entire life trying to hold us together just so we could destroy each other after he died. So I answered honestly, I'm still angry. Jason nodded slowly. I know, but... I continued quietly, I'm tired of losing family. That nearly broke Mom completely. She reached for both our hands at once like she was afraid we might disappear again if she let go. Outside the courthouse, rain still poured steadily over the parking lot while people rushed beneath umbrellas. Jason lingered beside my truck awkwardly. There's something else, I said. He looked up cautiously. I spoke with the estate attorney yesterday. His expression tightened immediately. I'm not taking the full inheritance. Jason frowned in confusion. What? I leaned against the truck door. Dad wanted Ava protected more than anything. Jason blinked several times. I'm placing part of my share into an education and housing trust for her. He stared at me speechless. You'd still do that, after everything. I looked toward the rain. Ava didn't cause any of this. Jason covered his eyes briefly with one hand. When he lowered it again, tears mixed with rain on his face. My older brother had probably spent half his life avoiding shame. Now it finally sat in front of him with nowhere left to run. I don't deserve that kind of kindness, he whispered. No, I said gently. Probably not. He almost laughed through the tears. But Dad would have wanted it anyway. That finished him. Jason broke down completely right there beside the courthouse parking lot. Not loud. Not dramatic. Just a tired, middle-aged man finally collapsing under years of denial. And for the first time since we were children, I put my arm around my brother. Man, 6 months later, we stood together beside Dad's grave on a quiet Sunday morning. The oak trees around the cemetery swayed gently in warm Gulf Coast wind, while distant church bells echoed across town. Mom placed fresh flowers carefully beside the headstone. She looked healthier now, lighter somehow, not because grief disappeared, but because truth finally had room to breathe inside our family. Jason had started attending Gamblers Anonymous meetings 3 months earlier. He found steady work managing inventory at a marine supply warehouse. Nothing glamorous, but honest. Ava was preparing for graduate school. And me, for the first time in 20 years, I'd stopped taking overseas contracts. I rented a small house 15 minutes from Mom's place. Close enough to help, far enough to breathe. As we prepared to leave the cemetery, Mom reached for my hand. "Your father would be proud of you." I smiled softly. "He loved you too, Mom." Fresh tears filled her eyes immediately. "I know," she whispered. We ate dinner together afterward at a little seafood restaurant near the marina. Nothing fancy. Fried shrimp, hush puppies, bad coffee. But somewhere between passing tartar sauce and arguing about football scores, we started sounding like a family again. Not perfect, not healed completely, but trying. And at our age, sometimes trying is the bravest thing left. If this story touched your heart, remember to cherish the quiet people in your life, the ones who carry burdens without asking for praise. Sometimes the strongest love is the kind nobody sees until much later. And if you've ever known someone who sacrificed silently for family, share this story with them. They deserve to be remembered too.